And on that basis, I want to say that it's a great honour and privilege to have been elected to the House representing the Hunter electorate for the 7th time, and I extend once again my sincere thanks to my electorate for giving me that ongoing opportunity, and recommit myself to using all of my energy and all of my ability to do the very best for my electorate. Now, there's been much said, Madam Speaker, about the change, the big difference, I suppose you might say, between the 43rd and the 44th Parliament. And certainly it is and will be a different place. Hung parliaments are by their very, very nature unruly, untidy and, on occasions, if not often, very, very chaotic. And the 43rd Parliament was all of those things, of course. And as Chief Government Whip for most of those 3 years, no one is better placed than me to fully appreciate that. But it's going to be more than the strong majority of the government which will set apart the 43rd and the 44th Parliaments. What will really set them apart is this transition from a can-do government, a government intent on reform, to a new government which is simply intent on keeping things just the way they are, or more particularly, winding the clock back to the way they were prior to the 2007 election. Now, Madam Speaker, this, of course, is the very essence of conservatism. Conservatives dislike change. In fact, in some cases, they hate change. And of course, Prime Minister Abbott, I say with the greatest respect, is conservative with a capital C. And the problem for Conservatives, though, Madam Speaker, is that while they can do their best to hold back change in their own nation-state, they can't do much to change progress and movement beyond our national borders. They can't do much to control what's happening around the rest of the world. Further, Madam Speaker, it's all right for Conservatives to be satisfied with the world as it is. Or more specifically, I suggest it's all right for wealthier Conservatives to be happy with the status quo. The problem with that, of course, Madam Speaker, is that not everyone is in a position to enjoy the status quo. The underprivileged in our society, working-class people, people who work excessively hard to make ends meet, aren't always happy with the status quo. And certainly, on the matter we discussed during question time today, people aren't satisfied with the status quo in education. We are falling behind the rest of the world. The status quo is not good enough for those who aspire for a better life for their children, and that's the sort of Australia I want to see, a place of greater opportunity. As great a country we now are and always have been, we still have too many people of underprivileged status, too much inequality, and too big a gap between the haves and the have-nots. So, Madam Speaker, we really should be about change, constantly working to make Australia a better place. Madam Speaker, I'm particularly grateful to the statistician who, some time ago now, did some very detailed work on what's involved, or what is the greatest role of government, or how can the government best reduce that gap between the haves and the have-nots in our society. And of course, he identified the obvious mechanisms governments have available to it. We have the progressive tax system, which of course in itself redistributes wealth from the wealthy back to those who need it most. We have the transfer payment system, of course, pensions and unemployment benefits, even childcare benefits, things that give families a lift up. And of course, what is less obvious of those mechanisms is the use of what the statistician described as non-cash benefits. What are non-cash benefits? Well, non-cash benefits are the provision of services to local communities, provision of childcare, for example, hospitals, and particularly if, as we have in Australia, we have a public health system. These are the things the statistician back in, albeit 1997, said were the measures which did most in our economy to reduce that gap. And that's why I've always had a very strong interest as a member of this place in the inequality of services and the lack of provision of infrastructure in rural and regional Australia. And it's why that's one of the reasons that's always been a passion for me. And to go back to the member for Malley's fine contribution, I agree with him absolutely on this point, and that is the more of the wealth that is generated in rural and regional Australia should be returned to rural and regional Australia. And of course that was the whole principle behind the now hotly debated mining tax. Mr Deputy Speaker, look, I'm happy for people to have arguments about the design of the tax and whether it should have raised more revenue or should not have raised any revenue. But if the government was really serious, they would reshape the tax in their own formula. Don't try to put up the argument, or I invite them to put up the argument, that the principle behind the mining tax was not sound. And the principle was, when companies are making super profits, extracting and exploiting natural resources owned by the people who live in rural and regional Australia, a fair share, at least a fair share, and I'd even argue a greater share than that, should be returned to rural and regional Australia. And that is exactly what the mining tax sought to do. So again, fiddle with the design of the tax all you like, Prime Minister, but don't stand here and tell us that the principle underpinning that tax was one worthy of being challenged. It simply was not. And this is very important in electorates like mine. Mining has brought great wealth to the Hunter Valley, and we welcome it. And people have enjoyed living standards they could not have dreamed of without mining, although I point out that it's been cyclical and many villages in my electorate have suffered from, of course, the arrival and then departure of coal mining. So the benefits need to be spread over considerable periods of time. But also with mining comes adverse impacts, environmental issues, water and air quality, for example. Supermarket prices rise as they chase higher wages that come with coal mining, the presence of coal mining. Roads become excessively congested. Childcare and housing becomes more difficult to secure as demand outstrips supply as a result of mining. So mining is welcome and fantastic for mining regions, but it does bring challenges, and those challenges need to be recognised when people are thinking about how to fairly distribute the government royalties and other taxes that come from that industry. So I appeal to the Prime Minister to have a rethink of his position. Again, redesign the tax in his own name, but please give more thought to rural and regional Australia. Now, this is a theme that has been with us for all of the almost 18 years I've been here. The reality is that the Conservative parties in this country have never really been serious about regional development and really intervening in regional communities. Chifley, of course, Prime Minister Chifley had a deep-seated interest in this area of policy. Robert Menzies came along and did nothing for 18 years or more. And then, of course, it took a Whitlam government to become serious for the first time in decades about intervention in regional Australia, including, of course, decentralisation. Malcolm Fraser showed no interest whatsoever. And then, of course, the Hawke and Keating governments picked up the ball and ran with it once again with various programs, including one which stands out in my mind that shepherded by then Deputy Prime Minister Brian Howe in the area of housing in particular. But The current Prime Minister Abbott has a chance to break that cycle, to break that record, and for the first time get really serious about rural and regional Australia. And I have to say, it's not a very good start to abolish the House Regional Committee. Not a very good start at all, and it sends all the wrong signals to regional Australia, as does the decision to drop the ball on making sure that when mining profits are high, those profits are returned to their source. Now, that's not the only bad sign, Mr Deputy Speaker, we've seen from this government in the short time it's been in office. The other bad sign, of course, is the decision to dishonour regional Australia grants announced by the former Labor government. Not election announcements or promises, Mr Deputy Speaker, decisions of government, decisions of cabinet, made by the cabinet prior to the calling of the election. Now, and these were serious processes, Mr Deputy Speaker. Councils typically, but also other organisations, would put submissions to the local chapter of Regional Development Australia, in my case the Hunter chapter. They would prioritise these projects based on their merits. We have people with expertise in the region, serious business people taking a bipartisan approach who would vet these projects and make recommendations to a second committee in Canberra, which would again vet these projects and prioritise them on their merit before making a recommendation to the Minister of the day. Now, that's not pork barrelling or part of an election campaign, Mr Deputy Speaker. That is a serious, incredible process, producing outcomes of great merit. And as a result of this decision, I'm going to read them into the Hansard, I have lost a number of seriously important local projects, like the Levy project in Maitland, which is a redevelopment of the Heritage Mall and an opening up of that mall to the beautiful Hunter River. $7 million from the Commonwealth, or should have been, a very important project. Mid-Western Regional Council, Candos Loft improvements. Mid-Western Regional Council, Rolleston Disabled Access Footpath. Muswellbrook Shire Council, Denman Recreational Area Facilities. Muswellbrook Council again, Olympic Park Car Park. Singleton Shire Council, the Singleton Regional Livestock Market upgrade. Upper Hunter Shire Council, a project known as the White Park Development. Now, these were projects the councils have been struggling to fund for some time. They are much needed projects in these local areas, and again, these are projects that were funded under a very robust and credible process and should be honoured by this government, and it's not too late for this government to honour them, Mr Deputy Speaker. Now, it doesn't stop there. I'm bordering on devastated by the decision not to honour the money allocated under the National Crime Prevention Fund. And many towns in my electorate have a great need. We have, like most communities, a great need for new facilities, new technologies to deal with antisocial behaviour, vandalism and the like. And we did very well under this program. Again, very important projects like $99,000 to Maitland City Council for CCTV cameras in the Maitland CBD, another $86,000 Maitland City Council in the Rutherford area of Maitland for CCTV cameras, and new fencing for Singleton Council at a local park called Howell Park. All very, very meritorious projects put forward by local councils that had again gone through a rigorous and robust process, but for some reason, not honoured by this government. Now, we've heard a lot pre-election about the budget emergency and the level of Australian government debt. Well, of course, now they're in office, there doesn't appear to be any budget emergency, and they're raising the debt limit so they can borrow more and spend more, Mr Deputy Speaker. And of course, I think people out there in the community are starting to wake up to the fact, despite what they were told by the coalition throughout the election campaign, that there's no government debt problem in Australia at all. And in fact, we have, compared to the rest of the world, one of the best positions in the world, and of course a AAA credit rating from each of the rating agencies, something other countries around the globe would kill for. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, let's not say that debt inherited from the Labor government or budget deficit inherited from the Labor government necessitated, given the proportionality of that debt and the deficit when you look at countries around the world, is justification for abolishing CCTV cameras in Maitland. I mean, really, in a government budget approaching $500 billion, really did we need to deny these local communities these important infrastructure projects? Remembering, if I can go back to where I began, what the Australian statistician said about the tools available to government to reduce the gap between the haves and have-nots in this country, or even more particularly in this case, the gap between the services and infrastructure enjoyed by those living and working and playing in the cities and the dearth of availability for those of us who live in rural and regional Australia. And this is where this takes me back to a theme I was talking about on an agricultural bill in this place earlier today. We need huge amounts of investment in the agricultural sector, huge amounts. The so-called dining boom, as I like to call it, can do for the Hunter Valley and other places what mining has done to the Hunter Valley. But we will need, on one estimate, $600 billion of investment by 2050 to achieve those aims. And by necessity, obviously, given the population of our country, the nature of our country, much of that investment will by necessity have to come from foreign sources. And the GrainCorp decision is a poor one, not just for the decision itself, but for the failure to explain the decision, Mr Deputy Speaker, and the signal that sends to potential investors in Australian agriculture all around the world. I challenge the Treasurer to do, if nothing else, explain fully to international investors the basis on which he made that decision, so they can fully understand what the rules are when they're looking to invest in Australia, because at the moment, and global capital is very competitive, they're looking around and I suspect they're saying it's all too hard, it's not, well, not worth the investment and it's not worth